The Vothran conclave called the session a review. That was their first mistake, using a word that implied the record could be examined, when what they meant was that the verdict had already been written. I was seated at the far end of the observer's bench when Commissioner Halveth called the chamber to order. He was the kind of figure who filled a room by standing very still, pale gray skin pulled tight across a wide skull, 4 eyes arranged in a low horizontal band, the outermost pair never fully closing. The conclave had been running treaty reviews for 300 years. They carried themselves accordingly. The session had been convened on a single matter: a formal sanctions order against the Terran trade delegation, effective immediately and binding on all 11 signatory systems. The stated grounds were an act of provocation during the Merit Station resupply dispute, a cargo seizure that the Conclave's archive classified as a unilateral hostile action by human personnel. I had been sent to observe. That was my official role and my only one, as far as the Conclave knew. My actual role was something else. Halveth read the archive entry aloud. His voice was flat, precise, each word placed like a stone. The holographic display above the table rendered the incident in still frames: a Terran hauler, a boarding party, a manifest flagged as contraband. The images rotated slowly. The assembled delegates from the 11 systems watched. A few took notes on their record slates. No one from the Terran delegation was present. They had been informed of the session date 2 standard days ago, a window that, given transit time from the nearest Terran relay, guaranteed they could not attend. I had been in system already, an oversight or so the Conclave believed. I watched Halveth work through the archive. He was thorough. He cited clause numbers, cross-referenced the trade compact, established the legal chain with the patience of someone who had done this before and expected no resistance. The delegates murmured agreement at the appropriate intervals. 2 of them had already drafted co-sponsorship forms for the sanctions motion. The vote was called at the 43rd minute. The motion carried 11-0. That was when I reached into my document case. Chip was small, a standard Terran data format, the kind used for sensor logs and field recordings. I did not stand. I did not announce myself. I slid it across the polished table from the observer's bench. A quiet friction scrape of composite against stone came to rest in front of the nearest delegate, a Surath elder named Tovanis, representing the outer compact systems. Tovanis looked at the chip. Then he looked at me. I said nothing. I was already gathering my bag. The Surath elder picked it up and inserted it into his record slate. The display opened. Heard the sound before I reached the chamber door. A change in the room's ambient noise. Particular quality of a space where many people have stopped breathing at the same moment. I did not turn around. I had already seen what was on that chip. I had reviewed it 14 times in the preceding 3 days. The sensor log had been pulled from inside the Merit Station docking ring, not from the Terran hauler, from a fixed installation node owned by the Conclave's own transit authority. An interior angle. The timestamp was precise to the second. It showed the boarding party clearly. It showed the manifest. It showed what the Conclave's archive had described as a Terran hostile action. And it showed, in the same unbroken continuous recording, with no edits and no splice points, the Vothran Transit Commissioner who had ordered it. Terran, a Vothran official, Halveth's own deputy. The silence behind me went on for a long time. I had counted on approximately 8 seconds. That was the time it took for a trained diplomat to process a visual record, match it against a known face, and understand the implications. Tovanis was faster than most. 6 seconds. I heard the intake of breath from his direction. Then the murmur, the shift of chairs, the sound of other record slates being activated as delegates requested the data be shared across the table's local relay. Halveth said something in Vothran. I did not catch the full phrase. My Vothran was sufficient for proceedings, not for rapid speech under pressure, but I caught the word for irregularity, and I caught the word for observer, and I caught the silence that followed when the room understood those 2 words together. A delegate called out. Not to me, I think. I was the only one moving. She asked me to wait, to remain for clarification, to submit the chip for verification. Voice had a careful quality, the flatness of someone trying not to let urgency show and not quite managing it. I opened the chamber door. The corridor outside was wide and empty, lit by long amber strips in the ceiling. I walked without hurrying. What I had not told them, what the chip made obvious, but what no one in that room had yet had the space to calculate, was that the sensor nodes, recordings were continuous and cross-indexed. The Merit Station node had been running for 4 years. Every docking event, every cargo transfer, every transit authority instruction issued in that ring was in that archive, all of it, time-stamped, authenticated, unedited. The Terran Trade Delegation had a copy. So did the Joint Commission auditors. So did 3 members of the Outer Signatory Press Corps. I had spent 6 weeks ensuring that. The conclave had called it a closed file because they had written it themselves and believed no one else had seen the room. They had never considered that the room itself had been watching. By the time I reached the transit hub, the first courier request from the conclave's legal office was already on my comm. I did not open it. The second arrived before I had cleared the security gate. The third came in a batch of 4, all within the same hour, their urgency escalating in the subject line language through what I can only describe as the standard stages of an institution that has just understood it made a catastrophic error in front of witnesses. I forwarded all of them to the Terran Trade Commission's legal team and closed the channel. The sanctions motion was formally suspended 41 minutes after I left the building, not withdrawn, suspended, because the conclave's procedural rules required a second session to reverse a unanimous vote, and calling that session meant admitting why. Halveth's deputy resigned the same afternoon. The resignation was listed in the public record as voluntary and for personal reasons, which was accurate in the way that most things the conclave put in its public record were accurate. Technically defensible, true in no meaningful sense. What took longer, weeks as it turned out, was the formal request for reseating of the Terran delegation, came through the joint channels rather than directly, which was the conclave's way of putting a layer of institutional distance between themselves and the act of asking. The Commission's liaison forwarded it to me as a courtesy. I passed it to Ambassador Reyes without comment. She read it. She set it on her desk and did not respond for 11 days. She was not being petty. I knew her well enough to know that. She was giving the conclave time to count exactly how many of the 11 signatory systems had seen that sensor log, to understand that the Terran delegation's absence from the original session had been a choice and not an oversight, to sit with the full weight of what they had attempted and what it had cost them. On the 12th day, she sent a one-line reply through the Commission. The Terran Trade Delegation would resume participation in treaty sessions under the original pact terms, no amended terms, no additional clauses, no acknowledgement of the conclave's request beyond its acceptance. I have been asked, since then, whether what we did was a form of punishment, whether the 11-day silence was designed to be painful. Leaving the conclave's spot sit with the suspended sanctions and the resigned deputy and the unanswered request was a deliberate application of pressure. My honest answer is no, we simply did not hurry. The conclave had believed the file was closed because they had controlled the record. They had never considered that another record existed. Older, continuous, already in several hands by the time they called the session. They had voted on a fabricated archive with total confidence and total unanimity, and they had done it in front of an observer they had not troubled themselves to identify. That was the case they thought they had closed. It had never been opened. They had simply been inside it. I don't carry the chip anymore. I left it with Toventis when he requested it for the Commission inquiry. I think about the sound I heard when his display came on. That held stillness. The rooms held breath. The moment when 11 delegates and 1 commissioner looked at an image they recognized and understood exactly what they were looking at. No one in that chamber said a word, neither did I. That seemed about right.